Los Angeles, California. March 1973. Chuck Norris arrives at LAPD headquarters to teach a special defensive tactics course. When a 20-year veteran cop says in front of the entire class, "With all due respect, martial arts is fine for tournaments, but street fights are different. When someone's high on PCP trying to kill you, your kata won't save you." What Chuck does in the next week doesn't just prove the cop wrong, it saves lives, changes police training standards across America, and proves that real martial arts isn't about looking good in demonstrations, it's about surviving chaos when your life depends on it. The training room is in the basement of LAPD Central Division, concrete block walls painted institutional green, fluorescent lights humming overhead, wrestling mats covering the floor, the air thick with decades of cop sweat and stress. 30 officers sit on folding chairs, ages ranging from mid-20s rookies to late 40s veterans, all mandatory attendees for this experimental defensive tactics program. The department is trying something new, bringing in an outside martial arts expert to supplement traditional police defensive tactics, see if Eastern fighting systems have anything valuable to teach Western law enforcement. Chuck is 33 years old, world karate champion, running successful martial arts schools, beginning to break into Hollywood, but not yet famous outside martial arts circles. He's been invited by Captain Richard Morrison, a progressive officer who believes police need better hand-to-hand combat training, who's seen too many officers get injured in physical altercations because their tactics are outdated, ineffective against determined violent suspects. Morrison convinced the brass to fund this experimental program, brought Chuck in to teach, promised him 30 officers for 1 week, 5 days intensive training, opportunity to prove martial arts has value for law enforcement. The officers are skeptical. Most have received basic police academy defensive tactics, some wrestling holds, baton techniques, handcuffing procedures, mostly emphasizing weapon control and calling for backup. The idea that a martial arts instructor from the civilian world can teach them anything about real violence seems laughable to many. They face actual danger daily, genuine threats, people who want to hurt or kill them. What does a tournament fighter know about that? The veteran cop who speaks up is Sergeant Mike Collins, 42 years old, 20 years on the force, seen everything, survived everything, respected by his peers for toughness and street wisdom. Mike has broken up bar fights, arrested violent felons, been in situations where a split-second mistake meant death. When he says martial arts won't help real fights, it's not empty criticism, it's hard-won skepticism from someone who's actually been there. Mike continues, "I've fought guys on angel dust who didn't feel pain, who kept coming despite taking hits that should have dropped them. I've fought gang members who train for this stuff. I respect martial arts as a sport, but the street isn't a tournament. There are no referees, no rules, no stopping when someone taps out. How do your techniques handle that?" Chuck doesn't argue, doesn't get defensive, just says calmly, "You're absolutely right that street fights are different than tournaments. I've never claimed otherwise. What I'm going to teach you this week isn't tournament techniques. It's practical defensive tactics designed specifically for the situations you face, controlling violent suspects, defending against weapons, handling multiple attackers, doing all this while maintaining professional standards and avoiding excessive force complaints. If any technique I show you seems impractical for real situations, call me out. I'll either adapt it or drop it. This training only works if it's realistic for your job." Mike respects that answer. No BS, no claims of being an ultimate fighter, just practical focus on their needs. Says, "Okay, I'll give it a fair shot, but I reserve the right to say this isn't working if it's not working." Chuck says, "Absolutely, I'd rather you be honest than polite." Day 1, Chuck starts with principles, not techniques. Explains that fighting isn't about memorizing moves, it's about understanding concepts, distance, timing, leverage, body mechanics, using opponents' force against them. Shows how small officers can control larger suspects using proper leverage instead of strength. Demonstrates on volunteers, inviting the biggest cops forward, showing how technique defeats power when applied correctly. The officers watch, impressed despite their skepticism. This isn't flowery kata, isn't demonstrations meant to look cool. This is practical, applicable, immediately useful. Day 2, Chuck focuses on weapon defense. Knives, guns, bats, improvised weapons. Shows officers how to close distance safely, control the weapon arm, disarm without getting hurt, He emphasizes realistic scenarios. Attacker won't cooperate, won't hold the knife still while you execute your perfect technique, will try to stab you multiple times. Chuck's training accounts for this, teaches dynamic responses, continuous movement, aggressive counterattacks that end threats quickly. Mike Collins volunteers to attack Chuck with a training knife, commits fully, tries to actually stab him. Chuck's defense is seamless. Redirect, close, control, disarm, control suspect on ground in handcuff position, 3 seconds total. Mike stands up, breathing hard, says, "Okay, that was different than I expected. That wasn't gentle, that was combat." Day 3, multiple attackers. Chuck sets up scenarios where officers face 2 or 3 suspects simultaneously, common situation in real policing. Shows how to position yourself so you're fighting one at a time, using spacing and movement to prevent being surrounded. Drills officers on this repeatedly, increasing pressure, adding chaos, making them think and move while adrenalized. Some officers struggle, revert to panic responses. Chuck coaches them individually, breaks down what went wrong, builds their confidence back up. By end of day 3, even skeptical veterans are moving better, thinking more clearly under pressure. Day 4, Integration Day. Chuck combines everything taught so far into full scenario training. Officer responds to domestic violence call. Suspect armed with knife attacks. Officer must defend, disarm, control, handcuff, all while partner officer provides backup. The scenarios are filmed, reviewed, critiqued. Officers see themselves making mistakes, learning from them, improving iteration by iteration. Mike Collins goes through 3 scenarios, each time performing better, incorporating Chuck's teachings naturally, adapting to chaos instead of panicking. After the 3rd scenario, Mike admits, "I was wrong. This isn't tournament stuff. This is legitimate defensive tactics, better than what the Academy taught us 20 years ago." Day 5, Chuck introduces one final element that surprises everyone: de-escalation through confidence. Explains that most physical confrontations can be avoided if officers project calm control instead of fear or aggression. When you know you can handle physical violence if necessary, you're less likely to resort to it prematurely. Shows how proper distance management, confident body language, verbal commands delivered with authority can prevent fights before they start. Officers practice scenarios where they talk down suspects instead of immediately going hands-on, using communication skills backed by martial arts capability. It's a revelation for many. Martial arts training isn't just about fighting, it's about not having to fight because you're prepared to if necessary. End of week, Captain Morrison observes the final assessment. Each officer goes through multiple scenarios: armed suspects, unarmed combative suspects, multiple attackers, all while being evaluated on technique, control, appropriateness of force. The improvement is dramatic. Officers who started the week uncertain and defensive finish confident and capable. Mike Collins, the skeptical veteran, performs flawlessly in his scenarios, uses everything Chuck taught, controls suspects effectively without excessive force, demonstrates exactly what the training was meant to achieve. Captain Morrison pulls Chuck aside afterwards, says, "This exceeded expectations. You didn't just teach them techniques, you changed their mindset. They're more confident, which makes them safer. I want to make this standard training for all officers. Can you develop a curriculum we can implement department-wide?" Chuck agrees, works with Morrison over the next 6 months developing the LAPD Martial Arts Defensive Tactics Program, a comprehensive training system that becomes model for police departments nationwide. Mike Collins becomes one of the program's biggest advocates, tells everyone, "Chuck Norris proved me wrong completely. I thought martial arts was dancing. Turned out it's the most practical self-defense training I ever received." 3 months after the course, I got into a confrontation with a suspect who pulled a knife. I used exactly what Chuck taught. Disarmed him, controlled him, no injuries to either of us. Before Chuck's training, that situation might have ended with me shooting someone. Instead, it ended with a clean arrest. That's the value. Over the next decade, Chuck trains thousands of police officers, FBI agents, military personnel, all getting variations of the same program. Practical defensive tactics designed for real-world violence, emphasizing control over destruction, professionalism over brutality, effectiveness over flashiness. His students go on to become trainers themselves, spreading the system across law enforcement agencies nationwide. By 1985, variations of Chuck's defensive tactics program are taught in police academies across America. In 1992, during congressional hearings on police use of force, Chuck is called to testify about defensive tactics training. He explains the principle behind his system. Officers need skills that allow them to control violent suspects without resorting to lethal force unless absolutely necessary.
Proper defensive tactics training reduces injuries to officers and suspects, reduces excessive force complaints, reduces lawsuits against departments. It's not about making officers into fighters. It's about giving them options between doing nothing and shooting someone. That middle ground is where most encounters should be resolved. The testimony influences national standards, leading to increased emphasis on defensive tactics training in law enforcement nationwide. Chuck's program becomes the benchmark, the standard other programs are measured against. In 2015, Mike Collins, now retired, writes a letter to Chuck, says, 42 years ago, I stood in a training room and told you martial arts wouldn't help real fights. You proved me wrong in 1 week. That training saved my life multiple times over my career. More importantly, it saved the lives of suspects I was able to control without killing them. You didn't just teach me to fight, you taught me when not to fight, how to fight only as much as necessary, and how to end confrontations without destroying people. That's the difference between violence and martial arts. Thank you for showing me the difference. Chuck keeps the letter in his office, alongside all his championship trophies and movie posters and black belts. When visitors ask about his proudest achievement, Chuck sometimes points to that letter instead of his more famous accomplishments. Says Mike Collins was a tough cop who thought I had nothing to teach him. 1 week later, he became one of my best students. Over his career, he used what I taught to save lives, both his own and others. That matters more than championships or movies. That's martial arts serving society, not just ego. So here's the question. What expertise are you dismissing because it comes from unexpected sources? What could you learn if you set aside your assumptions? What skills might save your life, career, or relationships if you were humble enough to be taught? Because Mike Collins was a 20-year police veteran certain that a martial arts instructor had nothing valuable to teach him about real violence. 1 week later, his entire understanding changed. And that change, that willingness to be wrong and learn anyway, might have saved his life and dozens of others. What are you refusing to learn because you think you already know enough? And what will it cost you to stay that stubborn? Because every expert was once a skeptic who became humble enough to be taught. Which will you choose?